Hello, good evening and welcome from the National Space Centre. And we're joining you once again on Friday evening for a live space session. Now, our doors may be closed, but we are taking our mission online. And this evening we are joined by some fantastic guests. And I'm going to introduce you to our co-host this evening, the lovely Sophie Allen from the National Space Academy. Good evening, Sophie.
Good evening, Malika. Hi, everybody at home. Hope you're all doing well.
And Sophie, would you like to introduce our guest this evening?
Yes, I very, very much would. I cannot emphasize how excited I am about this and how excited I know all of you are as well. You probably know them as the Joint Operations Commanders on the first crewed flight of the SpaceX Crew Dragon, the Demo 2 mission, but these guests are veterans of 4 NASA missions between them prior to that mission. They must have amazing stories to tell, and you at home have already sent us hundreds of questions to ask them. So please hit your love and like buttons and help us to welcome our very special guests tonight, Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley.
Good evening.
Good evening. Howdy, folks.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us. It's very exciting. Now, as Sophie has just said, we've had hundreds of questions for you guys. And the one thing I would say is, if you sent a question that doesn't get answered tonight, go and check out the NASA channels, because there are hundreds of questions that have already been answered by Doug, Bob, and all the other fantastic astronauts at NASA. And you will probably find your answers there. But without further ado, I'm going to start asking some questions, guys. We've got sections that we've put together, and the first one is about becoming an astronaut, because lots of people have asked us, how do they be as cool as you guys? Because they've seen you in those SpaceX suits, which are really cool. But of course, Space Shuttle as well. So Becca Age 7 on Instagram would like to know, Bob, what inspired you to become an astronaut, and how old were you when you started training?
Well, Malika, thank you. It's a great question. We get asked that one a lot as astronauts, and I'll say that even as a young child, I was really interested in the space program. I'm really interested in potentially having a career as an astronaut. But at the same time, when I was 7 or 8 years old, I wanted to be a race car driver and a rock star and a whole bunch of other things as well. It wasn't until I was a little bit further in my schooling that I really thought that becoming an astronaut was a possibility, because I found out the things I was interested in matched up well with, kind of having a career in science and technology and being an astronaut. And so I was a little bit older once I had some schooling under my belt, where I really understood that having a career like an astronaut was something that might make sense just based on where my interests were. I didn't get selected into the astronaut office until I was 29 years old and turned 30. Kind of just shortly thereafter, and so got started training around that time. Of course, I had a lot of training leading up to that point. I had gone through the test pilot school out at Edwards Air Force Base in California in the U.S., and I had also finished quite a bit of engineering and physics education in undergraduate and graduate school. So a lot of training that wasn't quite astronauting, but formally with NASA when I was 30 years old.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And Doug, Amber, who's age 5, and Daisy, who's age 9 on Facebook, would like to know, how many years training does it take to become an astronaut, and what was your favourite subject at school?
Oh, those are great questions. Our training as astronauts, the basic training is about a 2-year program. So when Bob and I showed up almost 20 years ago now, when we started training, we had 2 years where we did many, many different subjects, including simulators for the space station, learning the space station systems, learning the space shuttle and the space shuttle systems, as well as Earth photography courses, science courses, orbital mechanics courses, you name it. We probably had a training session or more in it. And we also got trained to appear in front of people, kind of like we're doing today, public speaking. So really a breadth of different exciting courses that we got to take over those 2 years. Plus we, for the folks that joined the astronaut office that came from non-flying backgrounds, they got qualified in the P-38, our training aircraft, so that we could fly missions together and practice together in a dynamic, what we would call a dynamic environment, which is a really good preparation for actual space flight. My favorite subject, I don't know if I could pick just one. Coming from my background, which was as a pilot in the military, I love to learn about new aircraft. And so I think for me, maybe the most exciting thing was learning about the space shuttle, how it was built, the different systems. It was a very complex vehicle. And then ultimately getting a chance to actually fly the space shuttle was an incredible experience.
Fantastic. Yes, a lot of people joining us tonight will know you from the Dragon mission. But Doug, you were the pilot from the last space shuttle mission that was 11 years prior to that. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a while time, but just to make sure people are aware of that fully. So, Bob, Fiona on Instagram would like to know, what is something you have learned in your journey to become an astronaut that you would like to share with all the future astronauts watching tonight?
Well, for Fiona and everybody else watching tonight that's interested in becoming an astronaut, I would say perseverance is really kind of the key. Our journeys are not short ones. I mentioned I didn't start training as an astronaut until I was 30 years old, and that was after quite a bit of education under my belt. And then our missions, we don't prepare for those overnight either. It does take some time to learn how to operate the space station, learn how to operate a space shuttle, learn how to operate a Dragon capsule, learn how to operate a spacesuit, even things like operating the airlock so that you can get the spacesuit out the door off the International Space Station. It takes some time, and there's a lot of details that have to be done just right, which means you want to have some experience and some training on it. And so that perseverance, everything doesn't go necessarily perfectly the first time when you're learning those things, and you need to keep your head down and stay focused on your goal, and you'll achieve it. And I think that's been a big part of the career for both myself and for Doug. I know riding on that Dragon capsule, taking it into orbit and getting docked and coming back home, for each of us was a 5-year plus endeavor to build a new spacecraft and get it to the International Space Station. So perseverance is the message I would have for Fiona.
Fantastic, thank you. And what a lovely time it is that people can start to consider being an astronaut as a career. I know a lot of the people that we've spoken to previously have said they didn't set out to be astronauts, they set out to do what they loved in life, and then became astronauts off the back of that. So I think, for everybody that's out there, that's the way forward. But also with commercial spaceflight, and certainly looking at the possibility of launches from now the US and potentially the UK in the future, there are so many careers that are open to people right now that are really exciting. So huge thanks for that. For both of you, Alex on Instagram would like to know, who are your astronaut heroes? So Doug, who would be your hero?
Oh gosh, it's hard to name just one. I mean, our predecessors. The first one that really comes to mind is John Young. He was just had an incredible career, and when Bob and I first started at NASA, he was still part of the astronaut office. So we were lucky enough to get to interact with him on almost a weekly basis our first several years. I think he was somebody who just personified that coolness under pressure. He was able to fly in 3 different programs. He walked on the moon, and he was just an incredible role model in every way. And it was a real honor to just be in the same office with him for several years. Another person who I never was lucky enough to meet, but I always wanted to, because I just thought he and I would probably have a great time together over a drink or just talking at an event, would be Pete Conrad. But unfortunately, he was fatally injured in a motorcycle accident not long after we were selected, and so didn't get a chance to meet him. But just an incredible amount of former astronauts that we've gotten to meet throughout the years. And I would probably say Mark Polanski, who I flew with on my first flight, he was my first commander, was a tremendous role model for me as well. In that, I think he just took me under his wing and really helped me kind of figure it all out, because there's a lot going on when you do your first space flight, and it was really neat to be able to kind of lean on somebody who had been through it before.
Fantastic, thank you. And Bob, how about for you?
Doug covered a lot of great points and a lot of great examples of role models and heroes inside the astronaut office. I think for Doug and I, when we came into the office, there were folks who were still getting the opportunity to do things for the first time, like Eileen Collins or Peggy Whitson. Those were just wonderful folks to watch as they gracefully took on those responsibilities for the first that they were able to accomplish. And for me, even before being in the astronaut office, I look all the way back to Neil Armstrong and the first man to walk on the moon, and the grace and humility that he presented throughout his career. He was somebody who did something first that it's really hard to top, walking on the moon as a human being, and he was able to do that and remain humble through that entire experience, through his entire career as an astronaut, and then with his post NASA roles and responsibilities, just a calm, humble, quiet, non-assuming individual that had accomplished something so great. Was just wonderful to see, and I think he's just a great role model for everyone who gets the opportunity to do something for the first time.
Yeah, I'm going to wholeheartedly agree with that. We were very lucky to talk to Jerry Griffin a few weeks ago, who said exactly the same about Neil Armstrong and the humility of a man who did something that means that his name is known across the world. But guys, you now fall into those footsteps as well, in the fact that Launch America was such a massive event. We shared the NASA launch in the UK with 80,000 people, and that was just people watching on our channel. So what you guys have achieved, you must see that you're role models now, and that must be quite a big thing to have on your shoulders. How does that make you feel, Doug?
Well, I think as Bob and I were going through it, certainly as astronauts, that's in the back of your mind that some people consider you role models. But I certainly in the lead up to the DM2 flight and our time on ISS, I don't think we appreciated or understood kind of how much the mission brought together the entire world. And I think obviously part of it was the pandemic, but it was just really neat to see people be excited about something that we've worked our whole adult lives in the space industry and flying in space and human space flight. And so I think for us, we just we want to try to be 1/10 as effective as Neil Armstrong was in the way he conducted himself, not only professionally but personally, and just reflect well on the astronaut office and NASA and the folks out at SpaceX who were every bit as responsible for the success of the mission as anybody. And it just we were just proud to be a small part of it, but we really enjoyed the fact that people really took great heart on our mission and supported us from afar. And it was just really neat to see it and be a part of it.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Right, we've talked about becoming an astronaut. We're going to talk now a little bit about your journey into space. So I'm going to hand over to Sophie, who's got a few more of those questions that have been submitted in advance.
Fantastic. Thank you, Malika. So Bob and Doug, obviously both of you are veterans of the Space Shuttle program. So you had the chance to experience, both from a pilot point of view and a mission specialist point of view, that iconic spacecraft. But then with the Dragon capsule, when I was looking at the internal shots from the cabin, and it just looks like the epitome of a kind of a sci-fi dream of what space shuttle should, what space travel should be like. And we've had a lot of questions about that journey up into space. So Olivia Age 9 on Facebook wants to know, what is the better ride, the Space Shuttle or the SpaceX Dragon X, and why? And Doug, I'll pose that question to you.
That's a great question. It would be so hard to choose. I think each one of them were unique and how they felt and the way the vehicles flew and how you interacted with the vehicles. I certainly have to agree with you that the Dragon just is a sleek, incredibly elegant and very intuitive vehicle, easy to understand, easy to manipulate the controls. The displays are well made, and you're sitting right there. The shuttle, we have to remember, was developed in the 1970s, so we had about 2,000 switches and circuit breakers to deal with inside the crew module of the space shuttle. So significantly more complicated to master. So it took a lot more training, relatively speaking, to really get proficient at all the things we needed to be proficient at inside the vehicle. So very tough to choose a winner. It's like, what's your favorite pet or who's your best friend? Pretty tough. I mean, for Bob and I, we were lucky enough to fly 2 different endeavors, and they both took great care of us. And it would be so hard to pick just one.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm not sure I could pick as well. There's something about, I get very nostalgic about the shuttle program because it's the program that I grew up with. And for me, that was the epitome of space travel. But I have to admit, the inside of the Dragon capsule just looks very, very, very cool. Thank you very much. Bob, Ethan, age 10 on Facebook, would like to know, when parts of the rocket, like the boosters, fall back down to Earth, is this generally over the sea, and do these get recovered?
It's a great question, and it's something that was true a little bit for the space shuttle, and definitely true on the Dragon vehicle and the Falcon 9, which is the booster that you ride into orbit. On the space shuttle, before it was retired, the solid rocket boosters would come off, and they would gently land in the ocean, and then they were recovered, drugged back to the port in Florida, and then shipped all the way back to Utah in the United States for refurbishment, for reuse. There was a large external tank that was a very thin, probably the best description of it is much like a soda can or a pop can that was very thin walled. And when it came back through the atmosphere, when the space shuttle was done with it, it would typically break up into some very small pieces, primarily just the heavy bolts that held it onto the space shuttle itself. The Falcon 9 takes reusability to another level. It brings that entire first stage booster back and lands it on a barge, or depending on the orbit that it's sending the cargo into, it can actually bring it all the way back to the land in Florida, near where the launch pads are, to kind of facilitate the refurbishment, which is pretty cool. I know if folks were following along with our mission, they were able to see that our booster made it back and landed on a barge that was controlled. Both came back aligned with GPS and were able to be brought back to port for reuse. And I believe an upcoming Dragon mission will ride a reused Falcon booster is the plan that's in work at this point. There are other pieces of the rocket that aren't necessarily reused. There is another stage, if you will, the second stage, if you will, on the Falcon 9. It's a little bit akin to that external tank that we had to dispose of on the space shuttle that doesn't make it back. But I do know that if they can figure out a way, the SpaceX team will probably bring that stage back someday in the future for some missions if they can sort that one out. But we do just lose part of it, but we try to bring back as much of it as we can.
Excellent. Yeah, and I think reusability is such an important part of modern space travel. If we want to make it a little bit more sustainable, if we want to make access to space cheaper, then that's been a key thing that SpaceX has been looking at. And they do look so majestic when they time down and land perfectly. It's amazing to see. Okay, on to our next question. Doug, you mentioned about the space shuttle that there were lots of switches and that there were lots of, circuits and things like that. But Toby, age 5 on Facebook, would like to know, what was your favourite button in the Dragon capsule and what did it do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, it was, part of being a pilot is actually getting to fly these space vehicles. And we were lucky enough to get to do that. And SpaceX developed just an incredible innovation in that we flew the vehicle via the touch screens that we interacted with. And I don't know if anybody else has ever gotten to do that in space. I'm pretty sure they haven't. So, but it worked very well. It worked exactly like the simulator worked back in Hawthorne, California. And as part of the test mission, that was an objective that we wanted to achieve, and we were able to do that both in free flight, and then when we got closer to the International Space Station, and it flew exactly like we expected it to fly. It controlled very well, and that would likely have to be my favorite part of actual buttons. It was a touch screen, but there were certain buttons on that touch screen, so I'd have to call it that one.
Oh, fantastic. It just sounds like a huge amount of fun, as well as, the seriousness of the big launch. But to have that new opportunity and that new experience in that situation must have been exhilarating for you guys. Okay, we have one more question in this area of getting up into space, and this one we will ask to Bob. This is from Nikita on Instagram, and Nikita says, during your journey to the ISS, how do you deal with being sedentary for long periods of time?
It's a great question. We were lucky that our trip to the International Space Station was relatively short. We got into orbit. We're able to take off our suits and get a little bit to eat and then go to sleep. So most of the time that we were on our way to the International Space Station, a big chunk of it, we were able to sleep. So that was, one way of dealing with being sedentary for such a chunk of time. And we had to do the same thing when we undocked from the space station before we were able to come down and splash down off the coast of Florida. We did get a little bit of chance to move around, of course, before putting our suits back on and getting a chance to dock. We did not do exercise or things like that like we typically would do daily on the International Space Station while we were on board the Dragon capsule. And primarily that was because the time that we were in free flight on that vehicle was so short. And so we really didn't have a big challenge with how long we had to stay stationary or sedentary, but we took the opportunity when we weren't sleeping to take pictures out the window, get a bite to eat, and make sure we had everything put away so that it was in its place when it came time to dock or splash down. Those big important events you don't want to mess up.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sophie. Good questions there about the journey into space. And the next section is another person or thing that will seem to be inspirational from this mission. And I'd just like to say he's just testing now and floating over. So we've got lots of questions, strange enough. Oh, I can see something glittering there. About a very famous character. So for both of you, I think Bob, we'll go over to you though, because I saw something glittering there. Chrissy Ryan on Facebook would like to know who decided that Tremor the dinosaur would become the mission's unofficial mascot, and did you bring the dinosaur back home, and where is he now?
Let's see. I'll answer the end of the question first, which is this is the Tremor. This is the dinosaur, the Apatosaurus, that took the ride with Doug and I to the International Space Station on the Dragon capsule. Doesn't seem quite as majestic now that it's back home. It doesn't float the same way. But the dinosaur itself was selected by our sons. The technical details are that in my household we have an excess of dinosaurs, not as many dinosaurs as there are in Doug's house. His son is a little bit older and had the interest a little bit longer, but we collected up the ones from my house that were soft enough to take the ride into space should they come unstowed and get loose about the cabin. We needed to take something soft, and we lined them all up, and then the final decision was actually made by Doug's son Jack. He picked this Apatosaurus Tremor to go along with us on the ride, and luckily this Apatosaurus was able to pass the rigorous testing protocol that the SpaceX team put together, and they allowed him to stow aboard the SpaceX Endeavour capsule on our way to the International Space Station.
That's fantastic. I love the fact that SpaceX put him through his paces before he went on board. What is it about dinosaurs? Because, Doug, I believe Karen made a dinosaur on the ISS as well. So, Doug, are dinosaurs a big thing in your house?
Yeah, they certainly are. They still are. Our son is 10, and he still loves dinosaurs. He's fascinated with them. And it was great to see Bob's son take an interest as well. And we thought that was really the only answer for us, was to take some sort of a dinosaur with us. The tradition stems from Soyuz, and that was one thing Bob and I were very tuned in about, was the different traditions, the different launch traditions that different crews have had through the different programs. We had some in Shuttle, and this was one that was kept alive during Soyuz, which was this 0G indicator. And so we felt like it was a great tradition to continue, and wanted to give future crews the opportunity, which I think the Crew 1 guys and gals brought up Baby Yoda, so a great zero-G indicator, and we just think it's a neat tradition. And it's also, closer to home. Your families go through a lot as you're working through, especially the last 5 years, as we work through all the different things we had to do and all the time away from home and all the stress of the actual mission. So it's great to bring them into the mission as much as possible. And especially with Bob and I, with 2 young sons, it was just a neat way to bring them even closer into the mission.
Yeah, it was fantastic to see just how much there was of your family there at the launch event, saying goodbye when the Tesla drew away, and then when you came back and you were sitting doing your speech, and the families were there, and they are an integral part. And I should imagine it's really difficult, being away for so long. So having dinosaurs there, very good. And you've just set off all the fanboys, by the way, Doug. He's not Baby Yoda anymore. He has to be Grogu or the child. Otherwise, the Star Wars. That's it. They'll be at you. Right, I'm going to hand over to Sophie, who will take it a lot more seriously than I do. And she's going to talk about life in space.
Absolutely, yes. So, obviously, there were some amazing new experiences for you in making your way to the International Space Station in new pioneering craft with new technology and all of the slick shininess. But you were up there ultimately to do a job. And we've had a lot of questions that have come in about what it is like to live and work in space. Now, I know from work that the National Space Academy's done with Tim Peake when he was on the International Space Station. We developed some educational experiments for him to do for us while on board. I know that he had a pretty packed work schedule while he was up there. And we've had a great question come in for Doug from Ava Jane, age 8 on Facebook, which says, what is the main function of the International Space Station?
Well, I probably won't be able to talk about all the functions of the International Space Station. I think, to put it in the view that we have is it is a one-of-a-kind orbiting scientific laboratory. Bob and I were lucky enough to participate on a number of shuttle missions that worked on assembling the space station, both robotically and with spacewalkers, and that took many, many years. Now we're at the point where the space station is complete and we can actually do this incredible science. And the science ranges from cancer research to human studies on us to see how bodies react in space. If we're ever going to go to out to Mars or out into the solar system, we're going to have to figure out how to keep us healthy and happy the longer we're in space. We've had 6-month missions to the space station. We've had some people go as long as a year, and it definitely has effects on the human body. The other thing we have to do, like any ship, we have to maintain it. We have to upgrade it. We have to take care of it. We have to clean it. So when we're not being scientists, we're being maintainers, we're being spacewalkers, we're being crane operators, or we're fixing the toilet, which happens every now and again. So the bottom line is it's a one-of-a-kind orbiting laboratory that we hope to maintain for many, many more years. And our job while we're up there is to kind of keep all those things going in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's achieved such a phenomenal amount in the time that it's been up there. Really unique research. Although the idea of the space toilet malfunctioning is a little bit terrifying to me. I imagine that's a top priority, keeping that one working. Another question, and we're going to lump a few questions together here. This one is for Bob. Now, Bob, you were mission specialists on your space shuttle missions, and Amelia, age 7, and Isabella, age 6, on Facebook asked, what's been the most successful experiment you've ever carried out in space? And we're going to join this with a question from Sam Howell on Facebook saying, my 5-year-old has asked what science experiments they particularly worked on during their stay.
It's a great question. You mentioned the mission specialist role on the space shuttle, and as Doug mentioned, during those flights, my primary responsibilities were assembly of the International Space Station. And so I did less science on those missions. I was really focused on installing additional facilities to the complex, and so that the laboratory, the U.S. laboratory, the central component of the U.S. operating segment, which all of the international partners are connected to. When I arrived, had a restroom in it. It had sleeping quarters in it. It had a lot of things in it that are not science or laboratory. And so by us installing another facility, we were able to clear out that laboratory to make room for the science that happened in the future. I was lucky enough with Doug as well during Expedition 63 to get the opportunity to actually perform a significant amount of science for the first time, which was really exciting. And so as a part of that, Doug and I worked together to get a plant habitat. That's probably the one that will be the easiest understood by the widest audience. There's a plant habitat that's taking opportunities to grow various types of vegetables on board the International Space Station, understand whether they can be grown on the same schedule, what type of nutrition is best for those plants so that they can continue to thrive. We were able to take a broken habitat and with a lot of coaxing, get it back together and get it ready. And they've since grown radishes after we were able to depart. So I would say that's been the one that has the quick turn and actual success that we can point to, that, hey, now there's radishes growing there, and they wouldn't have been able to do that in space without the work that we did on orbit. We did many other experiments with fluid mechanics, where we would watch the way that bubbles or droplets formed in the microgravity environment under the response of various forces, whether they were electrostatic or different lighting conditions or otherwise. And so those ones will take a little bit longer for the data to be transmitted to the ground and the scientists to look closely at it and understand the details of what they've learned from those observations. And they're part of really long studies that we may do a batch of experiments, and then a few months later, another batch of experiments is done under slightly different conditions, and they compare and contrast those results. And so sometimes that's the way science is that you don't do a test and find out the answer the very next day. It takes that perseverance that I talked about a little bit earlier in terms of solving a scientific problem that's of value. Sometimes takes years of effort, data collection and careful scrutiny, and then other scientists getting a chance to look at it as well. And so, but growing radishes, I think, and getting that plant habitat up and running was the thing that we're probably most proud of, that folks will be able to understand.
Yeah, and I imagine that in the short term, being able to grow food up on the International Space Station, at the very least, will introduce a bit of variety into the diets and the meal plans for astronauts. But of course, long term, the necessity to grow food in a microgravity environment, if we're looking at sending humans out, beyond Earth orbit back to the Moon and Mars, that would be a real advantage. We have another question here. I'm going to pose this one to both of you, actually. Arabella, aged 7 on Instagram, would like to know, what is the most exciting thing that you've experienced or seen on the International Space Station? And we'll go to Doug with that one first. Most exciting thing, Doug?
I would say the most exciting thing, it's almost daily that there's something exciting, but, it really comes down to the views that you have outside the cupola, which, by the way, Bob would never admit to this, but it was he who actually put the cupola on the International Space Station during one of his shuttle flights. So we have, as much as anybody, we have Bob and Nick Patrick, the two spacewalkers, to give credit for that just incredible part of the International Space Station, where if you have a few moments, you can go down and literally watch the Earth go by. But I think some of the things that are the most exciting or the most breathtaking, and we actually had several opportunities to see it, was Southern Lights. So Aurora Australis, flying through Aurora Australis is incredible. Bob got some incredible pictures of Comet Neowise we could see from the cupola. And then, of course, probably the other thing that's really exciting, at least for me, to fly over is just in the Far East, typically during our mission, there would be these huge thunderstorm complexes. And if you flew over them at night, to see the lightning through the clouds is just breathtaking to witness in person.
Amazing. Yeah, I've seen footage from the ISS showing kind of time-lapse footage in orbit, and you can see storms developing, and you can see the lightning in the upper atmosphere. And to see that in person, I imagine must be absolutely awe-inspiring. Bob, same question to you then. What's the most exciting thing you've experienced on the ISS or in space?
I think that maybe they're kind of a little bit two different answers to that question. In terms of seeing the most exciting thing, I think it was really bringing the Dragon capsule aboard the complex and then getting safely off. It took a miraculous amount of work, and it performed and was executed so well by the SpaceX team and the NASA team to allow that mission to happen. It was just a very exciting thing to see. Oh my gosh, we're right here and we're a part of what this giant team has accomplished was wonderful. So that was probably the biggest actual excitement if I looked at an individual moment. I would have to say that Doug described some very specific examples, but for me, during the spacewalks inside of your own spacesuit, being able to look down at the Earth below you, any snippet of Earth that you can watch as it's rotating underneath you, whether it's sunrises, sunset, or cloud formation, or storm formation, or any of those things are just mesmerizing when you get a chance to look at them with your own eyes, with just a couple thin protective layers between you and the vacuum of space and the Earth below you. It was just mesmerizing for me to be able to do that. And those moments are the ones that you got to reach out to your partner who's outside during the spacewalk and say, hey, look over there for just a minute, and then they'll be mesmerized as well. And is it wise to get both people distracted by the Earth below them during such a critical operation? But just wonderful views, and I would say they take your breath away, but they take your mind away to some extent, is probably the way I would describe it, for me at least.
Yeah, and that actually ties in really nicely with the next question that we've got. So Claire via email wanted to know, and I'll pose this to both of you actually, would you say that you've experienced the overview effect as a result of what you've seen while being in orbit?
Yeah, unequivocally, I would say no doubt whatsoever. Even that first glance out the window on your first flight, it just like Bob says, it takes your breath away. You're almost overwhelmed by looking back at our planet and seeing what you can see with your own eye, and the atmosphere, how thin it is, how blue the oceans are, the lack of borders, all those things, and the more you get to do it, the more you appreciate how fragile the planet is, how much we have to take care of it. And then, yeah, I kind of equate it to, if you don't experience something looking out the window, then maybe you need to find another line of work, because it's unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Absolutely. And important to remember that thus far, this is the only planet that we know has life on. So it's incredibly precious. And Bob, would you agree with that? Did you experience the same thing?
Absolutely. The overview effect is, kind of well described and discussed amongst astronauts and the folks who've been able to, view firsthand the planet from above. There's one more piece of that for me really brought it home. Was there at some point in the mission, usually towards the end of it, there can be a realization for you. Hopefully it's towards the end of the mission, because that's when you're best prepared for kind of the feeling that comes along. For me, it was one of a realization that, all the things that I really knew and loved, I like Doug a lot, I like Chris a lot, but my family was back home, and we still had a long journey to make on each of our shuttle flights and with the Dragon capsule to make it all the way home and safely get back to them. And so there's a realization that you've been doing some wonderful things on orbit, and the time has come to come home. And the thing that's pulling you home is you've got this wonderful planet below you, but the things you know and love are back there, and you're still working to get home safely. And so that realization, to me, I've never felt any place on the ground that same level of separation or realization, just how far away you are from your family and from home than I did, right before coming back on each of my missions.
Yeah, I can imagine that it puts everything in perspective, both on a planet scale and on a personal scale. And we have one final question in this section. This is from Sarah on Twitter, who'd like to know, and I'll ask this to Bob. Do you have downtime? And if so, what do you do?
It's a great question for the crews that are on board the International Space Station. You know, I think the question comes up, but it really is critical that crews that are in space for an extended period of time do have downtime. Everybody needs to understand the way that they best recharge and get ready for, you know, the future activities that are in front of them. They can't work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, or even just, you know, wake up and get to work and then go to bed and then wake up the next day and do the same thing for 2 months or 6 months or 12 months. You do need to figure out what works for you. I think for both Doug and I, we had a pretty aggressive pace, so we didn't get quite as many of those opportunities during Expedition 63 as we initially expected. We thought we might have Saturdays and Sundays off as an opportunity to do some of those things, but the way the spacewalk schedule and our landing opportunity schedule and some events where we actually lost hardware that we wanted to recover, whether it was a treadmill, because, you know, that's one of the ways that you might choose to recharge, is to get some exercise in, or do a little bit of a different run than you normally would. So we focused on fixing some of that hardware. But when we did have our spare time, Doug's alluded to it, we spent time looking out the window, taking photos. We also spend some time doing some really mundane things, but I think they're critical to helping you be ready for the next week's work or the next critical activity that's in front of you. We watched some sports shows on the television, some soccer matches. Doug was a big fan and was able to ensure that we always had the right channel on. If there was a match that we could follow along with, he would always have it queued up so that we could do that. Those things were ones that we felt were really important. I, with my family, took some time to read some books for my son so that he would be able to play those back. You know, he would be asleep sometimes when I had free time, so I was able to make some recordings so that I kind of kept interacting in that relationship with him as I did when I was on the ground. I was able to do many of those things, and that helped me be prepared and feel like I was still contributing to our functioning family down on the ground.
I'll just point out the fact you said that Doug watched soccer whilst you're in space. Doug, do you have a specific football team you follow by any chance?
Oh, I do.
He does not.
Is it an English team?
It was incredible that Project Restart worked out perfectly for our post-dinner time entertainment. So there was a match on almost every night through most of the summer that we were up there. So it was really neat. I'm a huge Manchester City fan and looking forward to hopefully another Premier League title this year.
Well done. I have a very good friend from Manchester who's just told me that you support the right Manchester team, and I've probably just put off half the audience, so I do apologise. I should never take sides. Right, so we've talked about your life on board the International Space Station, so we're going to do a section now about return to Earth. So Doug, this one's for you. We've got another joint question. So Nelly on Instagram would like to know, when you re-enter the atmosphere, what does it look and feel like? And Kate Gibbs on Facebook asks, how did it feel this time round when returning to Earth with the splash compared to the previous landing on a runway?
Oh, wow. Those are great questions. Just in general, a capsule reentry, the G-forces are much larger than what we experienced with Shuttle. So that was something that we had to be prepared for. You know, both Bob and I had short duration flights, so we didn't really necessarily know exactly what to expect with the greater Gs, since we hadn't been in space for only 2 weeks at a time. But it was definitely noticeable with the different G profile than what we experienced in Shuttle. Depending on whether it was day or night, with your Shuttle reentry, you could see the plasma out the windows of the Shuttle, the front windows or the overhead windows. With Dragon, I didn't really notice too much of that, and part of it is probably the way the windows were oriented. So we didn't really get a chance to see that plasma flow as we re-entered the atmosphere. And then I think, as you mentioned, the shuttle was designed to land like an aircraft, and the commander would land it just like an airplane, whereas the Dragon capsule was automated, and then at some point around 6 or 7 kilometers, our drogue chutes would come out. So that was the 2 smaller chutes, and that experience was much like a roller coaster, as we expected, but still an incredible amount of fun. But there's a lot of dynamics going on at that point. And then shortly thereafter, once the vehicle slows to a specific speed and goes through close to 2 kilometers, then our main parachutes, the 4 big main parachutes, come out, and you could feel and hear all of that very clearly in the vehicle. And of course, shortly thereafter, our splashdown in the water, which was, I would equate it to like a low-speed car crash. Certainly not to the same degree that Tim Peake experienced with the land landing on Soyuz. That's a pretty solid impact compared to what Bob and I had. But still, it surprised me that it was a pretty firm impact. And then we bobbed around a little bit. But for those of you who remember that day, it was probably the calmest no-wind day in the Gulf of Mexico that has happened that entire summer. It was just pristine conditions, and we bobbed around a little bit, but the folks that manned the ship, the Go Searcher ship for SpaceX, got us out of the water within about 30 or 40 minutes, and we were able to test out the satellite phone, call some of our friends and family, and the rest was up to them getting us on the boat. So incredibly different, but still both exciting rides back to Earth.
Yeah, you said about those calls. I do hope that Mr. Musk did pick up the bill for those calls at the end there for you. And before you launched, you did say on an interview that one of the things that you were really looking forward to was that landing and a celebratory vomit. Did that happen at all?
I should let Bob answer that one, since he appropriately.
Yeah, I'm the one who put that claim out there that we would be looking forward to the celebratory vomiting. I think both Doug and I were expecting to both feel potentially a little bit worse than we did on landing day, and we were also prepared for the worst case, weather conditions, with bobbing around a little bit longer. I guess I always feel weird using that bobbing with my name is Bob, but I think we both felt like we were going to potentially feel a little bit worse for the wear than we did. And I think we were pretty happy after splashdown, and we spent quite a bit of time talking to folks as we waited for the SpaceX team to approach safely and get us on board their recovery ship. And so while we were looking forward to it and ready for it, all we were really able to do was take an iPad out and do a celebratory video of the guys coming through the hatch and letting us out of the capsule. And so certainly, had there been any other sorts of alluded to celebrations, we probably wouldn't have captured it all on tape the way that we were able to capture our initial hatch opening with that team the day that we splashed down.
Yeah, I think watching that splashdown just was highlighted the way that all of the teams worked to make that mission such a success. It was such a phenomenal process that they went through, and every single step was done immaculately. It was just a great thing to watch. It was really bizarre seeing you guys coming back in for that press conference at the end, though, and you said, we need to sit down. Standing up for long periods of time, where we've been, it's quite hard. It did look amazing. We've got lots of questions coming in still, but we're going to crack on with the ones that were sent in advance. So, Bob, back to you. Angie Lee's on Facebook would like to know, what was your first proper meal when you got back?
It's a great question. I know what I thought that I wanted, which was kind of a big hamburger with French fries. I'll tell you what I liked the most was the chocolate shake that came with it, and so that chocolate shake was the thing that was my kind of proper food item, if you will, after we got back. That was once we were all the way back here in Houston. We both did eat some pizza, slice of pizza on board the airplane en route to getting back, but I won't call that necessarily the proper meal. It was that meal that was provided to us at a table back in Houston that I'll count with the chocolate shake as my first real meal coming back.
Fantastic, thank you. And how about you, Doug? What was your first real meal when you got back?
Oh, I loved the pizza on the airplane on the way back. I was starving. In fact, I remember commenting to Bob when we were waiting to get put back on the recovery ship. I was, the Dragon is an incredible vehicle, but one thing it does not have is an oven. So breakfast was some cold sausages and a cold drink, no coffee, no warm cereal, anything like that. So I probably didn't eat as much as I normally would have. I think both of us, as Bob alluded to, you're a little bit concerned. There's a lot of crews that come back from long duration space missions and they just don't feel very good after landing. And then to add to that, landing in the water, we were certainly a little bit concerned. But anyway, I was starving. So that pizza for me was wonderful. And it frankly, it's one of my favorite foods, if not my favorite anyway. So it hit the spot for me.
Yeah, Jeff Hoffman last week said anything crunchy, so he went with lettuce and pizza, so yeah, he was very happy with that. Although he did say he loved the shrimp cocktail because it had horseradish in and you could taste it. So it's a very different experience, I know, eating in space. Well, I don't know personally, but I've heard. Okay, so last question in this section. Bob, Liz age 7 on Facebook would like to know, what NASA projects are you involved in now, now that you've returned from the ISS?
It's a great question, Liz, and I think maybe folks don't realize that there is a little bit of a down period once you come back from a mission where you finish your debrief process. There's some recovery period that's 45 days or 60 days long. Doug and I are well past that, where we're doing kind of regular visits and checkups with flight docs and with the physical fitness team. And then after that, you have opportunities to speak with folks like you, which is really one of our primary responsibilities right now, which is to talk about our mission itself and the future here at NASA. And right now, my other additional activities have really been focused on preparing for the upcoming spacewalks. I was, having been the guy on board with Chris Cassidy during the last round of spacewalks, there are things that have come up that they've called us in for and said, how should we, address this, or do you think this will work out well for the crew that's on board? And that crew is really busy with all the things that need to be done in space, and we're trying to offload them a little bit with some of those spacewalking questions that we can answer with folks here on the ground. I think Doug and I are magically coming up on our 6-month post-flight milestone marker, which will, I think, happen early February here. And then the astronaut office and the NASA team will figure out the best pace to plug us in. So we are, I won't say anxiously awaiting additional work, but we're on standby waiting to find out what the NASA and the astronaut office needs us to do. We'll find out here in about 2 weeks.
Fantastic. We look forward to that. And I would imagine that your feedback on the mission that you've just been on is invaluable to NASA and SpaceX on the Dragon. So that must be a really important thing that you're also part of. Right, I'm going to hand over to Sophie now, who's going to ask some questions about future space.
Yes, so obviously, SpaceX, the Crew Dragon, along with, the other upcoming missions in the commercial crew program, it's very much looking to the future of space exploration. And first question in this section, it goes to Doug. Tamish on Instagram wants to know, do you think that SpaceX could be part of a future mission to the moon or Mars?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, currently they are part of 3 different companies that are building versions of the lunar lander, the human lunar lander that we hope to use during our Artemis missions to the moon. So they certainly are part of that. And I think in maybe more of a global perspective, I think, to go to the moon, to go to Mars, it almost needs to be an international effort as well as a public-private effort to be successful. It's a huge investment in workforce, technology, people, cost to do these types of missions. And I think to be successful, we've got to take advantage of all those things. And I think Bob and I feel very strongly that this public-private partnership that the Commercial Crew Program was a part of to develop two vehicles, human-rated vehicles that go to and from the space station is just the beginning of this as we venture back out into beyond low Earth orbit to the moon and then beyond. It's going to be hopefully a blueprint for that collaboration.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the Artemis program and the kind of the next step in terms of lunar exploration, particularly, aiming to get a woman onto the surface of the moon and things like that. And I do think I agree with you completely that international collaboration is not only going to be necessary, but we kind of owe it, this space exploration and visiting these places. It shouldn't just be done in the name of one nation or one state. It's an achievement that hopefully can be shared across the board. Kind of naturally moving on from that then, a question to both of you. We had two that we're going to lump together here. Paul Savin on Facebook said, if you had the chance, would you go to Mars? And Stacey on Instagram said, if you got the chance to go to the moon or Mars, would you go? So Bob, moon, Mars, if you had the chance, would you take it?
I definitely would be interested in a moon or a Mars mission. I do have a 6-year-old son at this point and a spouse, and so my wife, who's also an astronaut, planning to fly on an upcoming SpaceX mission to the International Space Station. I think the challenge for both Doug and I, and for any astronaut who'd be facing an opportunity like this, is balancing that time away from home and understanding what the mission entailed and whether or not it was a one-way trip, for example, to Mars to try to occupy it in some fashion and stay there. And then, as I alluded to earlier, with that kind of offshoot of the overview effect, that realization that, you are connected back to Earth, to people and things that you love back at home, and having that be something that you definitely, as a part of you, that you want to be able to reach back to. And so I'm really excited about those upcoming missions. For me, the most important thing is the way that it was described when we had the Apollo program, which was to put somebody on the moon and then bring them home again, is the goal that needs to be out there, and that's something that would be critical for me for a mission like that. But I'm definitely all in if you can put that caveat on board.
Excellent. What about yourself?
Yeah, I think we spent 20 years at NASA. I think both Bob and I got into this line of work because space excited us to a great degree. We grew up with the shuttle. I don't remember Apollo at all. I remember Skylab slightly. And just being part of the space business in what we've already accomplished, and then to see some of the younger astronauts that we've picked along the way since we've been here, and looking forward to either flying with them, supporting them, or cheering them from somewhere else. It's good to see NASA and this international collaboration that we have going forward with Artemis take shape, and to contribute in any way that we think we can. I think we've got a great amount of experience to fall back on and provide as we move forward with private companies, as I said, building the landers and getting the program to the point where we actually will fly people is exciting, and hopefully to be any part of it would be great. But if we're not, then cheering them from the sidelines would also be pretty neat, and watch the next generation take those steps on the moon like we saw in the late 1960s.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. That was our final section, and we've literally got 30 seconds remaining. And so I'm just going to throw in one quick question, Doug and Bob, open to both of you. So Max, Amanda Jane Young says, Max wants to know, what was your favourite thing to do that when you got back?
Hug my son was my favorite thing to do when I got back. He checked on me every night to make sure I was really back.
Yeah, it's indescribable how great it is to see your family after being gone, and after, frankly, the last 5 years of traveling to California on a weekly basis and being away from them. It was just so great to see them when we got back, and frankly, as Bob and I both know, because we've been on both ends of it, where we've watched our spouses launch into space, it's a tremendous relief for them when you get back. The stress is unreal at times, I think, on your families, and so it's almost palpable to see that relief, and it was just great to see them.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk with you. I have hundreds more questions, but we have run out of time. So on behalf of the National Space Centre, I'd like to say huge thanks to Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, and of course the whole team at NASA who made this happen tonight. And my co-host this evening, Sophie, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. Don't forget, lots of information that you can still see on the National Space Centre's social media. And if you want to watch this back, it'll be there for the rest of time. So do feel free to go back and watch. I do see a lot of the questions that you're putting in the comments have been answered in the session. And like I said right at the beginning, if you've got any questions, go over and have a look at the NASA channels. There's loads of videos on there where astronauts have answered lots of questions. And there's lots of fun stuff coming up. And there's a whole channel dedicated to NASA Kids as well. So if you're looking for some homeschooling ideas and you want some science, then this is the way to inspire. Other than that, stay safe, and I really do look forward to welcoming you to the National Space Centre again very soon. Thank you.